The antiseptic smell of the hospital hit me as soon as I stepped off the elevator, bringing back memories I'd spent 2 decades trying to forget. The last time I'd been in a hospital, I was 18 and terrified, clutching my best friend's hand as I brought my daughter into the world. Alone. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I made my way down the corridor, following the room numbers until I reached 412. Through the window, I could see her, Eleanor Matthews, my mother, looking far smaller than I remembered in the hospital bed. My name is Sarah Collins, and 20 years ago, my mother threw me out of our house for refusing to get an abortion. Now she needed me, and part of me wanted to walk away just like she had. But I'm not her. I never was. Sarah. A familiar voice made me turn. My younger sister Rebecca stood there, clutching a coffee cup, her perfectly highlighted hair and designer clothes a stark contrast to the sterile hospital surroundings. You actually came. You said it was urgent, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. That she's dying. Rebecca nodded, glancing through the window at our mother. Her kidneys are failing. She needs a transplant, and she hesitated. You're the only match in the family. Of course I was. Life had a twisted sense of humor that way. Does she know I'm here? Yes. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. She's been asking for you, actually, ever since she found out about the match. I bet she has, I thought bitterly. 20 years of silence, and now suddenly she wanted to talk, because she needed something from me. Again. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door and stepped into the room. The beeping of monitors filled the silence as my mother turned her head to look at me. Her hair, once a matching shade of dark brown to mine, was now completely gray. Her face, lined with age and illness, showed a flicker of something. Recognition? Regret? I couldn't tell. Sarah, she said, her voice weaker than I remembered. You came. I did. I remained standing near the door, maintaining my distance. Rebecca said you needed to see me. She tried to sit up straighter, wincing at the movement. I know it's been a long time. 20 years, I said flatly, since the night you threw me out for ruining your perfect family image. The memory of that night flooded back, sharp and clear despite the passing decades. I'd been terrified to tell her about the pregnancy, but I'd hoped, foolishly, that my mother would support me. Instead, she'd exploded. No daughter of mine is going to be a teenage mother, she'd screamed, throwing my hastily packed bags onto the front lawn. Either fix this mistake or don't come back at all. I'd chosen my baby. I'd never regretted that choice, not even during those first brutal months when I was sleeping on my best friend Jenny's couch, working 2 jobs while trying to finish high school online. Sarah, my mother's voice pulled me back to the present. I know I handled things badly. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Badly? You threw your pregnant teenage daughter out into the street. You didn't even ask if I was okay, if I needed help. You just erased me. I was trying to protect our family's reputation. No, I cut her off. You were protecting your reputation. Your standing in the community. Your perfect image as head of the PTA and church committee. It was always about you. She fell silent, her hands fidgeting with a hospital blanket. Rebecca, who'd followed me into the room, cleared her throat awkwardly. Sarah, please, she said softly. Mom needs a kidney. I finished for her. That's why I'm here, isn't it? Because suddenly you need something from the daughter you threw away. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Once, those tears would have devastated me, made me rush to apologize and make things right. But I wasn't that desperate to please teenager anymore. I made mistakes, she whispered. Terrible mistakes. But I'm your mother. Are you? I asked quietly, because a mother doesn't abandon her child when they need her most. A mother doesn't choose reputation over love. I thought about my own daughter, Emma, now 19 and thriving in her 2nd year of college. We'd had our struggles. Raising a child while barely more than a child myself wasn't easy, but I'd never made her feel unwanted, never made her feel like she had to earn my love. What do you want from me? My mother asked, her voice small. The truth, I said. For once in your life, tell me the truth. Not what you think people want to hear, not what maintains your image. The truth. She looked away, staring out the window at the gray October sky. For a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, she spoke. I was scared. I waited, saying nothing. When you told me you were pregnant, all I could think about was my own mother, how she'd been a teenage mother, how she'd struggled and suffered and died young, leaving me alone. Her hands twisted in the blanket. I was terrified you'd end up the same way. So you made sure I was alone yourself. The words came out sharper than I intended. I thought if I was harsh enough, you'd change your mind. Choose a different path. She let out a shaky breath. By the time I realized what I'd done, how badly I'd failed you, it seemed too late. It wasn't too late, I said, my voice tight with suppressed emotion. You knew where I was. Jenny's parents took me in. Let me stay with them until I finished high school. You drove past their house every day on your way to work. You saw my car in their driveway. I know. A tear slid down her cheek. I saw you sometimes, getting bigger as the pregnancy progressed. I wanted to stop, to apologize, but your pride was more important. I finished for her. She didn't deny it. Rebecca, who'd been silent during this exchange, stepped forward. Sarah, please. Whatever happened in the past. Mom needs help now. The doctors say without a transplant. I held up a hand to stop her. I know what happens without a transplant. I also know that agreeing to be a donor is a major decision, one that requires extensive physical and psychological evaluation. It's not something I can decide standing here in this hospital room. My mother's face fell, but she nodded slowly. I understand. I don't deserve your help. I know that. But would you at least tell me about my grandchild? Just once before. I studied her face, looking for any sign of manipulation, but all I saw was genuine longing and perhaps regret. Her name is Emma, I said finally. She's 19, studying environmental science at Berkeley. She's brilliant, compassionate, and stronger than I ever was. 19, my mother whispered. The same age I was when I had you. The irony wasn't lost on me. But unlike her, I'd made different choices when faced with a teenage daughter. I'd chosen love over judgment, support over rejection. I need time, I said, stepping back toward the door. Time to think about everything. About what you're asking. Of course, she said quickly. Whatever you need. Just, will you come back? Even if you decide not to. I paused at the door, thinking about Emma, about the lessons I'd taught her about forgiveness and compassion, about how sometimes the hardest choices aren't between right and wrong, but between different kinds of right. I'll come back, I said quietly, but not because you're my mother, because I'm not the kind of person who walks away when someone needs help, even if they once walked away from me. As I left the hospital, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. How did it go with Grandma? Are you okay? I smiled slightly, remembering her reaction when I told her about my mother's request. Unlike me at her age, Emma had grown up knowing she was loved unconditionally. It gave her the strength to be compassionate, even toward those who might not deserve it. I'm okay, I typed back. It's complicated. Can we talk tonight? Of course, Mom. Love you. 3 simple words that meant everything. 3 words my mother had never said to me after that night 20 years ago. I got into my car, but didn't start it immediately. Instead, I sat there, thinking about choices and consequences, about patterns repeating across generations, and about the power we have to break those patterns. My mother had chosen pride over love. I had chosen my daughter over everything else. Now I had another choice to make, and this time, lives hung in the balance. The next morning, I sat in my kitchen, staring at old photographs spread across the table. Jenny had dropped them off last night after hearing about my hospital visit, pictures she kept from those difficult early days after my mother threw me out. There I was, 17, and terrified, my baby bump just starting to show. Another of me studying for finals on Jenny's couch, textbooks balanced on my growing belly. The day Emma was born, my face exhausted but radiant as I held my daughter for the first time. My mother wasn't in any of them. She'd missed it all. My phone buzzed. Rebecca again. She'd been texting constantly since yesterday, alternating between guilt trips and pleas for understanding. Mom's numbers are getting worse. This one read. The doctors say we need to make a decision soon. I set the phone down without responding, picking up another photograph instead. This one was more recent. Emma's high school graduation. She stood between me and Jenny, all of us laughing at something off camera. My daughter had grown up surrounded by love, even if it wasn't the conventional family structure my mother had valued so highly. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. Through the window, I saw Jenny's familiar car in the driveway. I brought coffee and bagels, she announced as I opened the door. Figured you could use some moral support. 20 years later, and she was still taking care of me. Some friendships go beyond friendship, they become family. Have you decided? She asked, setting the food down and studying my face. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to walk away, to let her face the consequences of her choices like she made me face mine. Jenny nodded, understanding in her eyes. She'd been there through everything. The nights I cried myself to sleep, the struggle of juggling school and work while pregnant, the moment I finally held Emma in my arms. But, she prompted gently. But I keep thinking about Emma, I said softly, about how I've always taught her that forgiveness isn't about whether someone deserves it. It's about who we choose to be. And who do you choose to be, Sarah? That was the question, wasn't it? The one I'd been wrestling with since leaving the hospital yesterday. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Rebecca. It was Dr. Martinez, the transplant coordinator I'd spoken with last night. Ms. Collins, we've reviewed your mother's case. If you're interested in being evaluated as a donor, we should start the process soon. Her condition is deteriorating rapidly. I closed my eyes, thinking about choices and consequences. About the night my mother had thrown me out, and all the nights after when I promised myself I'd never be that kind of parent. I'll do the evaluation, I heard myself say. But I have conditions. An hour later, I walked back into my mother's hospital room. She looked worse than yesterday, her skin taking on a yellowish tinge that spoke of advancing kidney failure. Sarah, she breathed, hope flickering across her face. You came back. I did, I said, sitting in the chair beside her bed. And I've agreed to be evaluated as a donor. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, I'm not finished, I cut her off firmly. I have conditions. First, if I'm approved as a donor, you need to go to therapy. Real therapy, not just the church counseling you believe in. You need to deal with your own trauma about your mother instead of passing it on. She flinched but nodded. Second, I continued, if you want a relationship with Emma, and that's her choice, not yours or mine, you accept her exactly as she is. No judgment, no attempts to mold her into your idea of perfect. Of course, she whispered, anything. And finally, I met her eyes steadily. You need to understand that this doesn't fix everything. A kidney doesn't erase 20 years of absence. If you want to be part of our lives, you have to earn it. Every day. Can you do that? She was quiet for a long moment, really looking at me perhaps for the first time since I'd returned. You're not the same girl I threw out, she said finally. No, I agreed. I'm not. That girl died the night you chose your reputation over your daughter. The woman I am now, she's stronger, wiser, and a much better mother than you ever were. Harsh words, maybe, but true ones. Sometimes healing can only begin with truth. I'd like to try, she said softly, to be better, to do better, if you'll give me the chance. The next few weeks were a blur of medical tests, psychological evaluations, and endless paperwork. Emma came home from college to support me through the process, her presence a constant reminder of why I was doing this. You're amazing, Mom, she told me one night as we sat on the porch swing. I don't know if I could be this forgiving. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, remembering how tiny she'd once been. You could be. Because I raised you to be stronger than hate, bigger than bitterness. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't holding on to anger, it's letting it go. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday in November. As they wheeled me into the operating room, I thought about cycles and how we choose to break them. My grandmother had been a teenage mother who died young, leaving my mother alone and traumatized. My mother had responded to my pregnancy by choosing abandonment over support. But I had chosen differently. I had chosen to keep my baby, to build a life filled with love instead of judgment. And now I was choosing to give my mother a second chance, not because she deserved it, but because I refused to let her mistakes define who I was. 3 months after the successful transplant, we sat in my therapist's office, part of the healing process we'd both committed to. It wasn't easy. 20 years of pain and resentment don't disappear with a surgery or a few apologies. I look at Emma, my mother said during one session, and I see everything I should have done differently. She's so confident, so secure in your love. I robbed you of that security, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Yes, I agreed, you will. But regret can either paralyze us or motivate us to do better. The choice is yours. She was trying. She attended therapy faithfully, worked to understand her own trauma responses, and never once tried to force a relationship with Emma. She waited, patient and humble, until Emma decided she was ready to know her grandmother. A year after the surgery, we celebrated Emma's 20th birthday. 4 generations of women sat around my dining room table: my mother, me, Emma, and Jenny, who was as much family as any of us. The conversation wasn't always easy, and there were moments when old tensions surfaced. But as I watched my mother tentatively sharing stories with Emma, saw the genuine interest in her eyes as Emma talked about her environmental science projects, I realized something important. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't protecting our children from pain. It's showing them how to heal from it. I had given my mother more than a kidney. I had given her a chance to break her own cycle of trauma and fear. Whether she took that chance was up to her, but I knew I had made the right choice. Not because she deserved it, not because it erased the past, but because I had chosen to be the kind of person who helps others heal, even if they once caused me pain. That night, after everyone had gone home, Emma helped me clean up the kitchen. "You know what I admire most about you, Mom?" she said suddenly. "My excellent taste in birthday cakes?" I teased. She smiled but shook her head. "No, the way you taught me that strength isn't about not getting hurt. It's about what you choose to do with the hurt. You could have let what Grandma did make you bitter, make you hard. Instead, you chose to be better." I pulled her into a hug, thinking about choices and consequences, about cycles broken and new patterns formed. "That's the thing about choices, baby," I whispered into her hair. "They show us who we really are. And sometimes they give us the chance to help others become who they could be." My mother and I will never have the relationship we might have had if she'd made different choices 20 years ago. That possibility died the night she threw me out. But we're building something new, something based on truth and accountability rather than appearance and pride. It's not perfect. It's not always easy. But it's real, and sometimes that's enough. Because in the end, life isn't about the family you're born into. It's about the family you choose to build, the love you choose to give, and the person you choose to become. I chose to be more than my mother's mistakes. I chose to give more than I was given. I chose love over bitterness, healing over hate. And in making those choices, I gave my daughter something my mother never gave me: the knowledge that love doesn't have to be earned, that family should be a safe harbor rather than a storm to weather, and that sometimes the strongest thing we can do is choose forgiveness, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. The smell of garlic and basil hit me as soon as I opened the back door of Bella Rosa. Even after 6 months away, the scent was so familiar it made my chest ache. This restaurant had been my whole world growing up. The place where I'd done homework at corner tables, learned to make pasta at my nana's knee, and watched my parents build their dream into reality. Now it belonged to my brother Tony, and I was just a visitor. My name is Julia Romano, and 6 months ago, I agreed to let my younger brother take control of our family restaurant after our parents retired to Florida. It seemed logical at the time. I had a successful career in software development, while Tony had worked at Bella Rosa since high school. But something about his eagerness to take over had never sat right with me. Jules, Maria, our longtime hostess, spotted me as I made my way through the kitchen. "Oh my God, you're back." She rushed to hug me, her familiar perfume mixing with the cooking smells. "We've missed you around here. It's different now." The hesitation in her voice made me pause. "Different how?" Before she could answer, Tony's voice boomed from the office. "Who let you in the back door?" I turned to face my brother, noting how his traditionally warm brown eyes had turned cold and businesslike. At 32, 2 years younger than me, he'd always been the charming one, the social butterfly. But something had changed in him since taking over the restaurant. "I still have my key," I said, holding it up. "Dad never asked for it back." "Well, you should have called first," he said, straightening his expensive suit jacket. The designer label was new. Tony used to say only pretentious people spent that much on clothes. "We're busy preparing for dinner service." "It's 3 in the afternoon," I pointed out. "And I need to get something from Dad's office." "My office now," he corrected quickly. "What do you need?" Mom called. She can't find their wedding anniversary photo album and thinks Dad left it in his desk when they moved. Tony's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "I cleaned everything out of that desk. There was no album." "I'd like to check myself, if you don't mind." It meant a lot to Mom. He blocked the office doorway, his shoulder tense. "I said I cleaned it out. Don't you trust me?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken tension. Once, I would have said yes without hesitation. Tony and I had been close growing up, partners in crime in the controlled chaos of a family restaurant. But lately, 10 minutes, I said firmly. That's all I need. He stared at me for a long moment, then stepped aside with obvious reluctance. Fine, but make it quick. I have a supplier meeting soon. The office looked different than I remembered. Dad's old football posters were gone, replaced by modern art pieces that seemed out of place in a family Italian restaurant. His ancient desktop computer had been upgraded to a sleek laptop. Even the familiar smell of his cigars had been masked by some expensive air freshener. I went straight to the desk, pulling open drawers that had once been organized chaos but were now meticulously arranged. No photo album. I was about to give up when I noticed something odd about the bottom drawer. It seemed shallower than I remembered. Kneeling down, I ran my fingers along the edges until I felt it. A slight gap that shouldn't be there. With careful pressure, the false bottom popped up, revealing a hidden compartment. There was no photo album. Instead, I found a small black device about the size of a USB drive. When I picked it up, I realized what it was: a wireless camera receiver. Find what you were looking for. I jumped at Tommy's voice, quickly palming the device. No album, I said, standing up. Mom must have packed it after all. He nodded, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Then I guess you're done here. That night, alone in my apartment, I connected the receiver to my laptop. As a software developer, I knew my way around most technology. It took only a few minutes to access the stored footage. What I saw made my blood run cold. The camera had been hidden in the office's smoke detector, positioned to capture the entire room. I watched footage of Tony meeting with various people after hours. Meetings that had nothing to do with restaurant supplies. The restaurant's perfect for this, he told one man in an expensive suit. Cash business, high turnover. No one looks too closely at the books in places like this. And your sister? The man asked. She's not going to cause problems. Tommy laughed. Jules. She's too busy with her tech job to pay attention. Besides, she trusts me. They all do. My hands shook as I fast-forwarded through more footage. Money changing hands. Ledgers being altered. Conversations about cleaning cash through the restaurant's accounts. My brother was using our family's beloved restaurant to launder money. Suddenly, his insistence on taking control made perfect sense. His new clothes, his expensive car, his eagerness to get our parents to retire. It was all part of his plan. Oh, tell me, I whispered to my empty living room. What have you done? My phone buzzed. A text from Maria. Can we meet? There's something you need to know. I stared at the message, then back at my laptop screen where Tony was shaking hands with another sketchy business partner. How many people had suspected something was wrong but been too afraid to speak up? Corner Cafe, tomorrow morning, I texted back. 7 a.m. I stayed up most of the night, reviewing footage and taking notes. The camera had been recording for months before our parents retired. Dad must have suspected something, installed it secretly. But why hadn't he said anything? Why leave it for me to find? The next morning, Maria was already waiting when I arrived at the cafe, nervously shredding a napkin. I should have called you sooner, she said as soon as I sat down. But Tony, he's changed. He watches everyone, writes up people for tiny mistakes. 3 longtime servers have quit already. How long have you known something was wrong? I asked gently. She glanced around before leaning closer. A few months. The numbers stopped making sense. We're doing the same business we always did, but somehow there's so much more cash. And these men come in, have meetings with Tony after hours. Why didn't you tell my parents? Tony said he was making improvements, modernizing things. Your parents were so excited about retiring, about him taking over. She twisted her wedding ring anxiously. But last week, I overheard something. They were talking about using the restaurant to clean dirty money. When Tommy saw me, he said if I breathed a word to anyone, he'd make sure my son lost his scholarship. My chest tightened. Maria's son Marco was in his first year of medical school, attending on a scholarship Tony had helped arrange through one of his new business contacts. I found Dad's camera, I told her quietly. I've seen the footage. Her eyes widened. Your father knew. I think he suspected. But I don't understand why he didn't confront Tony directly. Maybe, Maria hesitated. Maybe he wanted you to find it. You're the one who could understand what to do with it. I thought about my father, about how he always encouraged my interest in technology even while Tony mocked it as nerdy. Had he known this moment would come? I need to be careful, I said finally. These people Tony's involved with, they're dangerous. And he has leverage over too many people. Maria nodded, understanding. What are you going to do? I pulled out my phone, showing her an app I created overnight. First, we're going to gather evidence. Real evidence, not just suspicions. I need your help, but it has to look like nothing's changed. Of course, she said without hesitation. Whatever you need. As we planned, I thought about the restaurant, about all the family memories it held. Sunday dinners after closing, birthday celebrations in the kitchen, my nana teaching me her secret recipe for tiramisu. Tony wasn't just laundering money, he was corrupting everything our parents had built. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. But I had to be smart. One wrong move, and I wouldn't just be risking myself. I'd be putting Maria, Marco, and who knew how many others in danger. I needed more than just the camera footage. I needed to understand exactly what Tony was doing and who he was working with. Most importantly, I needed him to keep underestimating me. Let him think I was just his tech-obsessed sister, too naive to see what was happening right under my nose. He'd learned soon enough just how wrong he was. Over the next 2 weeks, I built my case carefully. The app I created allowed Maria and other trusted staff members to document suspicious activities without risking detection. Every late-night meeting, every unusual cash deposit, every strange supplier who visited Tony's office. It all went into my encrypted database. But the real breakthrough came when I discovered something else in Dad's hidden compartment, a small notebook filled with codes and numbers. At first glance, it looked like random scribbles. But Dad had taught me about ciphers when I was young, one of our many nerdy activities that Tony had never been interested in. It took me 3 days to crack his code, and when I did, I felt sick. Dad hadn't just suspected Tony's activities, he'd been tracking them for months. The notebook contained detailed records of suspicious transactions, names, dates. He'd been building his own case, but something had stopped him from acting on it. I was in my apartment, cross-referencing Dad's notes with my home data, when my phone buzzed. A text from Tommy. Coming by the restaurant tomorrow? Need to discuss something important. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. In the past 2 weeks, I've visited Bella Rosa several times, playing the role of the oblivious sister perfectly. Tony had grown more relaxed, less defensive about my presence. Sure, I typed back. Lunchtime ok. Perfect, don't be late. I smiled grimly at my laptop screen, where I had footage of his latest business meeting playing. Don't worry, little brother. I wouldn't miss this for the world. The next morning, I backed up everything to multiple secure locations and made 2 important calls. Then I headed to Bella Rosa, the USB drive with the camera footage tucked safely in my pocket. Tony was waiting in his office, looking unusually pleased with himself. Jules, right on time. You said it was important, I said, taking the seat across from his desk. Everything okay? He leaned back, studying me with what seemed like genuine affection. More than okay. I've been thinking, you were right to be concerned about the restaurant, about our family's legacy. This was new. I kept my expression neutral, waiting. I want to offer you a position here, he continued. Director of Operations. You can handle the technology side, modernize our systems. We'll run it together, like we always talked about as kids. I felt a pang in my chest, remembering those childhood conversations. Once this would have been a dream come true. Working alongside my brother, building on our parents' success. Why now? I asked carefully. Because your family, he said, spreading his hands, and family should stick together. Plus, with your tech skills. He smiled. We could really expand our operations. The emphasis he placed on that last word told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't offering me a legitimate position. He wanted to use my skills to help him launder money more efficiently. That's quite an offer, I said slowly. Mind if I think about it? His smile tightened slightly. Of course, but don't take too long. This is a limited time opportunity. Was that a threat? Knowing what I knew now, probably. I stood up, adjusting my bag. I'll let you know by the end of the week. As I reached the door, he called out, "Oh, and Jules. Let's keep this between us for now. No need to mention it to Mom and Dad." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Outside the office, I took a deep breath, then texted a single word. Ready. Everything happened very quickly after that. As I walked through the kitchen toward the front door, I heard them enter, FBI agents moving swiftly and professionally. Tommy's outraged shouts echoed behind me as I stepped outside, where two people were waiting. Agent Carter, the woman introduced herself, showing her badge. "We got your evidence package. Impressive work." "Will it be enough?" I asked. She nodded. "More than enough. The camera footage alone would do it, but combined with your father's records and the financial data you collected, your brother and his associates are looking at serious time." I closed my eyes briefly, relief warring with sadness. "Keep my father's name out of it, please. He tried to handle it himself, protect the family. That's why he retired when he did, to get my parents away from this mess." "We understand," Agent Carter said gently. "As far as anyone needs to know, the investigation started with anonymous tips from concerned employees." I watched as they led Tony out in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face a mask of fury. Our eyes met, and I saw the moment he realized the truth. "You," he snarled. "My own sister?" "No, Tommy," I said quietly. "You did this. You betrayed everything Mom and Dad built, everything we were supposed to protect together." They put him in a car and drove away. I stood there for a long time, watching the place that had been my childhood home, now surrounded by federal agents and crime scene tape. Maria appeared beside me, tears in her eyes. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, squaring my shoulders, "we clean up his mess. Together." The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings, media coverage, and damage control. The restaurant stayed closed initially, but I refused to let it die. While Tony awaited trial, I worked with the FBI to clear Bella Rosa's name, proving that many of the staff had been unwitting participants in his scheme. I took a leave of absence from my tech job and threw myself into restoring the restaurant. The old staff rallied around me, not just Maria, but the cooks, servers, and busboys who had been part of our extended family for years. The hardest part was telling our parents. Mom cried, but Dad just looked tired. "You found a camera," he said quietly when we were alone. "And my notes." I nodded. "Why didn't you tell me?" He sighed heavily. "I thought I could handle it myself, protect both of you." By the time I realized how deep Tony was in, I was afraid they'd hurt him if I went to the authorities directly. So I left the evidence where I knew you'd find it. "Because I'm the nerdy one," I tried to smile. "Because you're the strong one," he corrected. "You always were." Tommy, he wanted easy success, quick money. But you understood what really matters. 6 months after Tony's arrest, we reopened Bella Rosa. The dining room was packed with familiar faces, loyal customers, employees past and present, people who believed in second chances. I stood in the kitchen, watching the organized chaos I remembered from childhood. The smell of garlic and basil still filled the air, but now it felt clean again, honest. Maria's son Marco, home from medical school for the weekend, was helping serve tables. He'd insisted on keeping his scholarship money, working to pay it back himself rather than letting his mother feel indebted to Tony's corrupt contacts. My parents came back for the reopening. Mom hugged every customer like family, while Dad stood in his old office, my office now, looking at the changes I'd made. The modern art was gone, replaced by family photos. His old football posters were back up, next to my framed computer science degrees. "You've done good, Julia," he said gruffly. "The place feels right again." I thought about Tommy, about the plea deal he'd taken that would keep him in prison for at least 5 years. About the choice I'd made to protect our family's legacy, even at the cost of betraying my own brother. "We'd all make choices," I said finally. "Tommy chose greed. I choose this, our family, our real family." Dad squeezed my shoulder, and together we watched the restaurant buzz with life. This was what success really looked like. Not secret meetings and laundered money, but good food, honest work, and people coming together to share something real. Bella Rosa was more than just a restaurant. It was a testament to the power of choosing right over easy, of protecting what matters most. Tommy had forgotten that, but I never would. Because in the end, true family isn't just about blood. It's about the choices we make and the people we choose to become. I chose to be my father's daughter, my mother's strength, and the guardian of everything they'd built. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. And sometimes that makes all the difference.